Start. Jay here is gonna do a very short presentation of his company that he's launching today. So
I need to do his little pitch. Oh, go ahead.
All of our videos will be talking, but just happy to announce that our company has gone live today. We do have job postings available, and I'll just play the little promotion video, get an idea what it is, and play some of the jobs we have after.
I'm working for you now.
Full screen.
Start off by making a personal profile that includes all the traditional aspects of their resume.
That's internet, not me.
Click on the YouTube button.
Introducing firstinterview.ca, groundbreaking online platform that will forever change the process. Job seekers start off by making a personal profile that includes all the traditional aspects of their resume. Then, job seekers show the employer who they really are by recording a 1-minute, personalized video of themselves. This is the job seeker's chance to get creative and showcase why they are the perfect fit for the job. When a job seeker applies for a job, they'll be prompted to answer a question posed by an employer. They'll be answered via a 30-second video response. An employer will then be able to easily view an applicant's profile, video image, and question response. With our unique active job search process, job seekers will be able to track the status of their applications, and they will be notified when the application has been reviewed, rejected, or accepted for a second in-person interview. If an employer likes what they see, they can extend a second interview to 3 days. Job seekers will receive an interview invitation along with lists of times they can be seen. Once the time is selected, the interview is confirmed. Firstinterview.ca has also gone one step further by integrating back-check technology into site. Employers can easily make sure their candidates are who they say they are at the click of a button. At firstinterview.ca, job seekers can not only apply for a job, but also interview for it. And employers can pre-screen applicants like never before. Welcome to the future of hiring. Firstinterview.ca, more than a job posting site.
Yes, let's. Oh, thank you. So that's just kind of quick how it works. We do have some job postings up right now. A lot of them are in the tech sector, looking for developers. One is like an HR resources job. We do have one big name on board, which is Randstad. They're the largest recruiting firm in Canada. They are going to be posting a lot of jobs in the upcoming 2 weeks in a wider breadth of fields. So it's not going to be just tech sector. It's going to be all kinds of sectors, both summer work and full-time work. We currently are working with, working on getting a lot of other big names. I'm not going to just say them right now, just to not disclose anything. But looks like in the next month or two, we should have a lot of jobs available. So if you're looking for a job, go on, make a profile, and start applying. And I just have some handouts here. I'll hand out.
Any questions or yeah, Patrick? What was the question, sorry? The button. Back check.
So creates the back end. So if an employer wants to do a back check on you, they would simply just click a button. You would be notified, and then you would have to fill out an e-consent form. So you don't go anywhere. You just link your email, sign it, Oh, it does a variety of factors. So most people do it after they want to hire you. Do the due diligence, criminal record checks, education verification, past experience verification, and like reference verification. So they might call you references, make sure everything's true and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and the site's completely free for everybody, by the way. This costs you anything.
I'm just gonna ask it kind of Kevin O'Leary question.
Do you watch too much bad television?
So I was just wondering. I think this is definitely going to be the future, and I think the idea is really cool. How do you I guess, protect yourself from bigger companies like online job posting sites like Monster actually coming in and doing that?
Good question. There's really no way. You know, we're through our marketing and our like our name. We're hoping is a big differentiator, kind of saying who we are. What we can really do to protect ourselves is write in our terms of use. All information is copyrighted and proprietary to us. Any attempt to replicate or try to do some of our features will be considered.
So is there anything like you can protect?
You can't really patent anything on this. But yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
Do all the videos get posted to YouTube, or do you guys have?
No, so we host them all internally, and they're all private. So any video you record of yourself can only be seen by the employer you apply to, so no one else can do them.
Who is the owner of the information, the site or the user?
It's a good question. It's in the terms of use, I think. Well, the user owns all their own information and it's just hosted by the site.
Okay.
So we do not own any of your information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Cool. Does anyone? Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. Okay, related to this, some people have been asking if there will be presentations of the personal projects. We will do that with people who volunteered if they didn't back off of the offer. But we will do that after we review all the assignments, okay? So in a couple of weeks, next week, you know that we have Anita Gaffney coming from Stratford. And after that, we'll try to do a few presentations, okay? So just one thing before we start. Today we start the second assignment. So get your teams ready, please, and get your agile methodologies in place, and get your research background on Stratford also done, so that we have good questions to ask Anita when she comes next Thursday, okay?
The cortex. Though less than a quarter-inch thick, the cortex is the brain's crowning glory. Among its roles, the cortex is our reality check. It filters and orders the outside world for us and allows us to see, touch, hear, and speak. The cortex is also the human thinking cap. All our plans, thoughts, and ideas originate in this layer. The cortex is packed with nerve cells. About 2/3 of all our neurons operate here. A piece of cortex tissue no larger than a pinhead can house 30,000 of these cells. Each neuron has a job: to communicate with other neurons. The brain works by forming networks among these cells. The long, spiny branches of the networks create a neural forest of astounding intricacy. Neurons use these communication lines to talk to each other with electric and chemical signals. Chain of events, an electrical zap followed by chemical changes, followed by another electrical zap, is the basis of all brain activity. It's how neurons speak to each other. Here, then, is the key to the brain's complexity. There are 100 billion neurons in the brain. Each neuron, like a bit player in a grand production, processes its information, then hooks up with as many as 50,000 other neurons to send and receive messages. 100 billion neurons times 50,000 connections. It's this complexity that allows us to think imaginatively. On their own, neurons aren't very bright. But put 100 billion of them together in a small space and let them all start talking to each other, and you start to get brainstorms. The trillions of neural networks, like an improvisational orchestra, create new ideas and connect different thoughts in a whimsical and sometimes inspired fashion. It's this impromptu ability to produce new things in our brains that allows us to progress, that quite simply takes us from here to here.
Okay, today's class is gonna go back to the individual and to the individual element of human beings that make us distinct. So we're gonna go to the brain as opposed to the social levels at which we have been studying creativity so far. And we're gonna try to go through some of the main theories and research perspectives on the brain and creativity. Okay? The first thing we have to say is that we don't know much yet about how the brain and creativity are related. Some of the theories coincide in that connectivity ability is one of the most important elements that bridge these two fields together. How this connectivity happens, we know some things, other things we don't really know. But connecting neurons is the first step to getting different areas of the brain connected so that new ideas, imaginative outcomes emerge from those connections. Can that be trained? Can that be produced? Is it related to certain mental diseases? Or is that some ability that everyone has? Is there a difference in the kind of education that you can provide someone so that they can become more creative? This is what we want to see through some of the main ideas on creativity and the brain, and then through a debate, a very interesting debate between a couple of the most important researchers in neuroscience in the world, Eric Mandel and Oliver Sacks, and a couple of very interesting examples of artists who have special creative abilities, as shown in their careers, but also in the case of Chuck Close, with important cognitive disabilities. We'll see how they go about their work and what is it that these experts think of it. Okay, so what are the connections between creativity and biology? Until very recently, as we have seen in historical terms, we didn't think that there would be some biological relationship between the brain or even the organism, the human organism, and creativity. One of the most difficult elements or barriers to overcome or to try to solve problems about creativity and the brain and biology is that, as we have seen so far, is that creativity is a very multifaceted phenomenon. So there are so many elements associated to creativity, so that it's really difficult to pinpoint one or two elements and try to do a very thorough research on those and come out with exact or accurate conclusions about that. We have seen that one of the definitions of creativity has to do with the realization, the moment of realization, in which you are able to produce, the brain is able to produce an analogy between previously unassociated mental elements. And you will see this is the first slide that we're going to see out of 5 or 6, and many of them talk about associations, connections, links between ideas, different areas of the brain, different states of representation of knowledge in the brain, connect, associate, being able to put together things which were previously unconnected, even though they were already there, seems to be one of the keys, or at least one of the hints that researchers are using to investigate this field. This realization normally is associated in our experience with the feeling that has been automatic and has been effortless. Okay? It doesn't mean that you haven't been working on something for a long time, that you have put the hours and the effort and the energy and you have been tired and have had all those feelings. But this very moment, the moment in which you suddenly realize of something, that moment of eureka, is like, happened like nothing. I was doing exactly that. I was doing nothing. And that is associated with certain mental states, which are more prone to produce this kind of realization. Okay? Of course, there are biological bases, as we will see, and in some cases, those biological bases have been tested in persons or people with certain disabilities. Okay? Think that many of the ways in which neuroscience as medicines study and do research is by doing the analysis or the investigation on cases which are not completely normal. So they can compare whatever happens to an organ or a function of the organism to the average of the human beings. And in these cases, people who are especially creative, but at the same time they are perceived as having certain abnormalities, are really interesting. This is one of the cases that neuroscientists study oftenly. It's the case of Yanxi Chang, someone who, I think it was a person that in California in the 80s, when she was 40-some years old, she was a teacher, she started developing a problem, which was later diagnosed as frontotemporal dementia. Okay? She started having problems to communicate, to produce language, and problems of social interaction in social settings. After a few years, she had to stop teaching. She had to retire because she wasn't able to be productive anymore or communicative in the school and any social settings. But at the same time, she started creating more than she had a hobby, and she started to develop that. But what they saw is that what she had been doing previously to the illness was completely different to what she started producing in artistic terms after she got sick with this dementia. And apparently she lost a lot of her inhibitions in social and personal terms, and that was correlated with an incredible growth in her creative abilities. She started painting wilder and freer art, and very emotionally charged, something that she didn't do before. Okay? So you have some of that art in these images around that you will see again at the end. Okay? So one case of a dementia, problems with inhibition, and at the same time an increase in the creativity, in the production, and especially in the type of things that she was doing in artistic terms. Are there other cases like that? We will see later on that Chuck Close, who is one of the most important painters of the second part of the 20th century in the world, really, has another problem. And she has developed a very characteristic technique of painting, which actually made him famous. He's not able to recognize faces. Okay? So he only remembers someone after he has been able to see him or her so many times. But one of the most interesting features of his production is the very detailed paintings of faces that he makes. Okay, we'll see how that works. So that's another case. So are there relationships at the level of the organism, the body, the biology, and the brain? Apparently there are. So what is it that we know about those relationships? A lot of the phenomenon related to this moment of realization that you have produced, we have produced something new, something creative, has to do with cortical activation. Okay, it has been proven that creative inspiration occurs in a mental state where attention is the focus, very important. Thought is associative, and a large number of mental representations are simultaneously activated. Normally, things related to the right hemisphere, more than the left hemisphere that is in charge of producing language and rational activity, rational thought. Okay? So normally that state rises with low levels of cortical activation, more right than left hemisphere activations, and low level of frontal activation. Many of those states are related to dreaming, daydreaming, relaxation, those kinds of states. So no states in which we are very focused in producing something very detailed, very specific, in which rational concepts or activity are needed. Another branch of the research on biology and brain and creativity has to do with psychology. And here it is clear that creativity and intelligence are not related. They are two different things, okay? There are not widely accepted tests on creativity in the same way that we have some already accepted tests of intelligence, those IQ tests. But there are certain features or elements that researchers look for or have found very common in people who are considered creative in their domains. Okay, so those have to do with ideation of fluency. How fluent are you trying to visualize many series of ideas that are connected, or you are able to connect somehow? What are your abilities to be exposed and to produce variety and flexibility when you are dealing with any area of human experience? Originality is another important element, defined as how many solutions you can provide for a single problem. Remember the first day when we tried to organize the line and how we all came together to one or two solutions? One of the most important exercises is, okay, I give you a problem, you don't have to solve it, but how many solutions are you able to thought about this problem? Okay, that's how originality is conceived. Ability to elaborate on a problem for long periods of time until you are able to massage it into a different form and try to solve it. That's also very interesting. Problem sensitivity. That's something that we're going to see in more detail next week when we talk about design thinking. How sensitive you can be to a problem and to all aspects of a problem, both emotional and rational, so that you can really be immersed into that problem and from inside, from within, being able to manipulate it, to change it, to move it, to solve it, to shake it, okay? And another way of doing that is by redefining the problem. That's one of the most important abilities, especially group abilities, when you are working with very complex problems, which are not very well defined, are very difficult to summarize or visualize in a single image and require a lot of points of view. So how do you redefine that problem so that you can solve it? Okay? In order to redefine any problem, you really have to be within the problem. Be very aware of all the rational and abstract elements, but at the same time, you have to be really emotionally attached to the problem, so you are able to manipulate it in emotional terms with your sensitivity. Okay? It's also very common, as you will have heard many times, that divergent thinking is normally associated with people who are considered creative. You have seen also in the social arena these days that many of these ideas are trying to be commercialized now, and that there are many companies offering different services related to the training of creativity. Many big or small companies hire artists, hire people who now claim that creativity can be trained. Okay? For instance, there is a research and training program in Harvard related to both the Faculty of Education and one of the groups that study complex systems, who have already redefined completely the curriculum for small children, so that they are exposed from the very beginning of their academic careers, when they are 3, 4, 5 years old, to a kind of training in which they will be solving complex problems from the very beginning, as opposed to our normal training in which you will have your classes of history on one side, mathematics on the other side, English on the other side, social sciences or environment or whatever. And in that respect, we are trained to think separately from different perspectives, so that we got to a point in which our brain is so sculpted in thinking in different compartments that fostering all these kind of exercises in creative problem solving is completely different. What these researchers have realized is that you have to get the children really small and try to avoid the compartments in which we try to explain and analyze the world, so that they have a big problem, they are in a group, and they have to come up with ways of solving that kind of problem. No matter if they are called history or mathematics or physics, this is the problem. How are you going to solve it? Okay? So the thing is, can creativity be trained, and how, if we decide that it can be trained? Another important element is inhibition. You have seen the case of the teacher that we talked about before, that she experimented very low levels of inhibition as a result of the disease, and that was correlated with her creative output and the change in the way she was creating. Apparently, social and psychological inhibitions are very low in creative people. Those people who apparently they give the impression that they don't care about what other people think. Okay, so they are not afraid of being exposed to social concerns, limitations, or considerations about how they look like, or how they are, or how they think about issues or problems. Since creativity depends primarily on the ability to integrate pieces of disparate data in novel ways, a lower level of inhibition is helpful. Again, if we have problems associated with certain types of information or data, and they belong to different areas of our experience and different areas of our brain, the only way to really come out with new ideas by associating these different sources of pieces or of data is by lowering all inhibitions about those borders, about those separations. Okay? So these people are people who don't have any problems. They're in the status quo about anything when they are trying to be creative in the solution of a problem. On the contrary, they are not afraid of being exposed, of failing, of being ashamed in front of people. They just try to activate those mechanisms in which you are able to connect, again, associate, put together pieces, integrate, to solve a problem, to redefine it, to think it in a different way. Okay? The question here is how this is connected to psychosis, and in social terms, to what extent inhibition is contrary to very specialized knowledge in any field. When you are very good at something, but at the same time you are only able to think through the lens of that specialized knowledge. Are you able to come up with new solutions when you are not even able to see the problems because your knowledge is guiding you in the way in which you have to think? That's one of the main problems that we have in society. Are we able to solve problems if we don't see them? Even if we have more and more technical, scientific, and specialized knowledge about something. An example of how not seeing the problem is the first barrier to any solution. One of the main problems that have people related to global warming is not whether or not it is true, or what's the impact of human activities on it, or whether you convince the politicians or they think that you are a left-leaning progressist or whatever. The main problem they have is how do you visualize a problem like global warming? How do you make people see it? Such a complex problem. How do you visualize it? And until you visualize it, and the community is able to do that, visualize it, view it, you are not able to solve it. Okay? So it's, in a sense, again, it's a problem of design, of putting an image to a problem that in rational terms, it's very difficult to define in a single paragraph, in a single piece of paper, even in a single book. How do you visualize it? Okay? And you have the same thing with most of the problems. If you don't see it, if you are not able to communicate it, is it possible to solve it? Well, I think that this is the main issue, connectivity and creativity, both in social terms and in terms of how you connect information that you already have. How do you access different areas of your brain and of your experience, and even in social terms, how do you access different experiences, different areas of people around you in your social network, okay? This is going to be one of the main assets in the future if it's not in the present. Creativity is a social skill these days because we need the intelligence and the input from all people around us in our social networks to be able to solve the problems we have, okay? So in the same way in which, Olivia, yeah?
Sorry, can you just maximize the screen?
No, I can try.
A little bit hard to see.
That? You see it? Okay. So the thing is, imagine that the network of neurons that we have seen before has a real continuation in the social network that you have outside. That both are glued together through your brain, through your experiences, through the contacts, okay? And you're simply looking at both sides of the same network, just mediated by our skull. The same way in which you access information about something you know, your memory, your experiences, you access, or you have to be able to access resources in your social networks. Okay? So connections, being able to traverse those networks so that you are able to put together different things from different areas is the key to most of the training of these first decades of the new century. This ability to connect normally is started with a process of incubation, work, of ideation, of thinking, and a second part in which you have this realization, the illumination that I got it. Okay, I was able to connect the dots. In this case, I was able to connect the areas through a network, a visual network. It is important that creative innovation has to do with relationships, expressing them in novel ways, understand them, but that these new ways are not unorganized. Okay? These are orderly relationships. Okay? This is always very important. It's not just that you come out with an occurrence, something that just happened in your brain. You have to connect that to something which is relevant. It has to be meaningful in its own setting. So you have to give it order. You have to give it relationship, not a hierarchical order, but some kind of meaning in the types of connections that you can establish with it. Something that comes to your mind and that is not connected with anything else of your experience is completely unorganized, unordered, and that's not creativity. Okay? That's just illumination after smoking some pot or something. So always think of these terms. They have to be new. They have to be new connections, new relationships, new associations. But when it's creative and it's innovative, there's some order to it. Okay? Remember first that a network has an order. There are certain mathematical rules that govern how a network is formed and how you can dissolve it. The same thing happens with ideas. There is an order in that emergence of new connections. Okay? The question here is how you connect intelligence, domain-specific knowledge, special skills, and most importantly, divergent thinking. Thinking in different ways, lowering your inhibitions, so you are able to connect those things. As we said before, this usually happens, the illumination and sometimes the incubation, in phases of diminished arousal. Sleep, dreaming, daydreaming, relaxation, basically changes in neurotransmitter systems. In many cases, people report, I don't know if you have these experiences, that they have the best ideas when they are in the shower, having a hot shower that has relaxed all the main brain systems. And you are not thinking about solving anything. You're just, and suddenly it's like, wow, something connected there that wasn't before. Okay, the same thing with daydreaming. You are not thinking about anything. You're just walking around, not thinking about solving the problem. You have very low arousal, and something comes to your mind that wasn't there before. That realization that different areas of the brain connected. In biological terms, it has to do with the ability to co-activate anatomically distinct representational networks. Okay, networks that represent the information in the brain, and they store them in different forms of knowledge. Again, people who are able to work through the borders of different disciplines, of different thinking systems, who are able to think in mathematics, but they are also able to draw an image or produce a video that will represent the very idea that they want to express. That's what you have to look for. Those are the kind of skills that we don't want to hear anymore. No, I mean the telephone or whatever is on there. That you have to try to practice. Be able to come out with skills from different areas and be able to produce new knowledge mixing those different areas. Okay? Oops. Is creativity driven, or is it a skill that you can train? Okay? Creative drive is not identical to a skill. The latter depends more on your cortical association areas. However, drive correlates better with successful creative output than skill does. Okay? We're talking here between the difference in what an output is and what the process of creativity is. Okay? A creative idea will be defined simply as one that is both novel and useful as we can see. And some researchers are focusing on the drive, okay? Because that's more tractable than just creativity. So the researchers are using a proxy to try to come out with elements that they determine that they are present in creative peoples. Again, the question in all these theories is, can we go to a process in which you can train creativity as a skill? Can we give a different system of education, of training? Okay, who considered herself or himself here open to new experiences? How open and to what kind of experiences? How do you conceive of being open to new experiences? This is very important, both divergent thinking and that domain of personality, that you are just open to experience other things. Olivia?
Trying something that you don't quite understand, that you have to step outside of your comfort zone for.
Okay. The comfort zone is something important that Ronen referred to the other day. Just coming out here and talk to people just because he's bad at it. Okay? Olivia?
I agree. I think it's putting yourself into situations you're not very comfortable with.
Okay. And you relate that to being more creative, or it's a question of personal growth, or?
I'd say personal growth.
Okay. More people. Crystal?
Well, just doing things that you're not really familiar with or confident in, and just kind of like looking for new experiences, places to go, things to do. I don't know, that's just a new deal.
Yeah. They've just been to another place in which the same things are solved in a different way. Simple things like cooking that you didn't even think about. It's really like going to another world, having that experience. And you really start putting together things that will be useful for you in the way you think, in the way you conceive reality when you go back to your normal place. Do you think that, or if you connect this openness to experiences with creativity? You want to elaborate? Putting you on the spot, sorry.
Well, I think so. Because just doing new things expands you to new ideas, new perspectives, and ways of looking at things. So, like, it all filters into just, like, ideas and things you'll come up with and ways to look at things.
Regardless of whether or not you are going to use them into a specific project or anything.
You'll refine
Who else?
I guess being
Right.
open to all perspectives, whether you, even if you think it's wrong, being open to be able to discuss it.
But that's okay. That's very important. But that is different from implicating yourself in. So the question is, for instance, here we talk and everybody has their opinion, and we accept all of them. But that's different from me going to your house and having to eat as you eat, or going to a country and doing something that I wouldn't do, something like that.
But by opening yourself to new experiences, you'll be able to open your mind to it.
Yeah, but that's the process. I mean, we can have a formal arrangement about respecting other opinions, but somehow the process is you are open because you are immersed into an experience, and then you get it. You say, okay, there are other opinions. It's not just that I have the only point of view on the universe.
Just being open is not enough yet. Because from a previous slide, you also said being creative, it's the ability to connect different data together and come up with a new perspective. So being open is the first step of being able to integrate data in not obvious places.
Yeah. More opinions. Someone raise their hands?
We're open to new possibilities in a way that's an enabling action, but I guess that doing something you're not comfortable with builds that sense of confidence in ways that you don't realize that will help you in other ways.
Yeah.
It's a way of kind of exploring this unknown space. It gives you more chances.
Mm-hmm. Who has done radical things in terms of dealing here in Canada with people that you would never deal? Like going to a neighborhood that you would never be, or to another country that you don't know anything, and you're like, wow.
The other week I met someone who, I know I've heard of the idea of arranged marriage, but I've never actually met someone who's gone through the process. And the other week I met someone who was married to someone who only knew for like 2 hours. So I was foreign to the idea, like I knew about the idea, but like I was just completely surprised of like why would go for someone through that process. So it shocked all my beliefs and why would you do that question. And I asked, I told him all my beliefs, and then he kind of gave his point of view. So that was very interesting. But that's definitely shocking.
Okay. More experiences like that?
I'm from like an all white town, pretty much. And so I mean, I'm not really culturally diverse. But I spoke to a girl that she was born in India, and she was telling me like basically how India is and how much different it is from Canada, and like all the different types of experiences, and I like, just opened my eyes like holy crap. Like, I mean, obviously, like as I've gone to university, I've met like more diverse people and people from all different types of countries, but that one really stuck out to me. She goes to the depth of like, I guess in essence the culture of India.
Mm-hmm.
So to me that was really interesting. That's nothing I've ever experienced.
If you go to India, anything that they have told you about will be a little similar to the reality you're gonna see there. It's like from here.
Yeah, and then I mean in terms of openness, like for me, I until I hit university, like I wasn't open to anything. Like I just liked my bubble. But then as I got to experience new things and I kind of like got involved in different types of clubs and whatnot, like I could see how much cooler everything out, like how much cooler things are, and how much, I don't know, I guess all the new experiences that exist out there, you just have to kind of find them, and that starts with being open to new experiences.
Yeah. Okay, Phil?
Back in my hometown, I used to ride the bus a lot when I was younger, so getting to kind of see the characters that are on the bus, especially like around midnight and stuff, it's kind of crazy. I remember one time I found out that there was like a hierarchy within the homeless guys in our town. So I don't know, it's just like a new experience to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Who has experienced the feeling of being naked metaphorical terms. That was real. It was naked in terms of what is it that culturally sustains your lives? What is it that you cannot live without?
I went like a lot of people always hear about like things that happen in third world countries, but I volunteered in the Philippines, like in a third world part of the Philippines, and you don't have a washroom, you don't have a shower, and literally it's a bucket, like a hole in the ground, or like to take a shower it's like a pail of water, and it's like water only comes on a certain part of the day, so it's like it's you really appreciate what you have.
Yeah.
And it's like stuff that you think that you won't be able to live without. It's like it's possible out there because a lot of people are doing out there.
And the thing is that you get used very fast, and suddenly you think that it's normal living like that. But even more than that, were you able to speak the language?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
I had to.
Have you ever been to a country in which you are there and?
I'm just interested as what part you came from, because I'm from like I was born.
That's Tacloban?
Are you?
Tacloban? Tacloban?
Tacloban?
Yeah.
You're from the Philippines?
Yeah, I was born there. It's
Hey, my sister is going to work there, to Manila. We have to talk.
like, I'm not a fan that people always polarize it as like a very, very developing country. There are areas where like they're similar to that, but it's more developed than.
Yeah. No. But what I was referring to is, I wanted to get to is when you go to a country in which you don't speak the language, and you feel like everything that you had has completely disappeared for you. You are lost.
Yeah, I've experienced that.
Where?
Well, I've been to a couple places, but I was in Turkey this summer, and we went through like rural Turkey. So like once you leave Istanbul, once you leave the big cities, like people don't speak English. People are really nice and really helpful, and like it was very interesting to learn that you could still communicate with people even if you don't speak the language, and you can kind of get past it.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to make an effort, you find that they're way more receptive to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yes, that feeling of being helpless and hopeless. You don't know what to do. You are in the hands of strange people, and in most parts of the world, people are really nice and they try to help out and they really embrace you. But you suddenly feel like you don't have anything. You don't have the culture that you have grown up in under you, and you don't exist anymore. You don't have anything to do or to say there. It's really having another experience, like getting into another world. It's like a world in which your language doesn't help you. Something that we don't even think about normally. We really count on the language that we learn. But being out there in any place, especially if you don't go through the touristic routes or you don't go to a hotel, you go to normal people out there, it's like, wow, now I'm really lost. And the world can do whatever it wants with me. That openness to experience is what these people are able to face without many problems. Okay. The thing is that in scientific terms, apparently this openness to experience is related to all measures of divergent thinking, except what are the obvious consequences. We don't know of all these, okay, of all these processes. Is that an indicator of future potential for creativity? We don't know. There is this myth about artists, especially being people who are open to many experiences. And this myth, you have seen it especially for your generation in musicians. Musicians are supposed, and groups are supposed to be open to everything in terms of experimentation, drugs, sex, alcohol, everything. And normally it's correlated to this ability to produce new things, at least in the musical sphere. But traditionally, all artists were like that. In fact, it's like society produces the artists for them to explore for the rest of us. We give them liberties, like they are in the bohemia, they live differently, they behave differently, they marry or they don't marry, they can do whatever they want. As though society knows that we need a group of people experimenting those things. Whether or not it's true, or we don't really know. We don't really know. But I would recommend openness to experience even as a way of investing to get rewards in the future in the terms of the things that you are going to be able to produce and solutions to problems you will have. Another important element, and I was terrified when the other day Ronan says that he only sleeps 3 hours a day because I cannot produce anything when my working memory is not really working well. And that, for me, is related to certain hours of sleep. Okay? So working memory here refers to cognitive processes that retain information in an unusually accessible state. That's what I am not able to do. When I'm tired because I haven't been able to sleep, my working memory is gone. So I don't have the information I need to perform certain tasks. I realize about that immediately. The accessible state suitable for carrying out any task with a mental component. The task may be language comprehension or production, problem solving, decision making, or the thought. So this seems to be also very important in the way in which working memory and creativity come together. They have it has some way to be present. Working memory is where thinking, problem solving, daydreaming, expert and exceptional performance take place. Okay? So again, another line of research that is trying to solve the puzzle of the brain and creativity. Now we are going to go to a brief cut of a program on the brain and creativity on one of the American networks, which have at least 4 very important personalities. As I said, in the program they have Richard Serra. Do you know who Richard Serra is? The sculptor. He's an American sculptor, one of the most important in the 20th century, and he works with strong materials like metals, and with huge sculptures, several tons, large, many of them. Okay, but he still works with the feeling of those materials, with the textures, and with creating spaces and experiences for his public. Then we have Chuck Close. If you Google him, you will see the kinds of images that he produces by hand, even although he is not able to perceive faces. Okay, he only perceives some forms in the faces, but he doesn't recognize them. And it's very important because identity, our ability to determine identity, is completely related to the face, our ability to recognize faces. And then we have Eric Mandel, Nobel Prize, who has a very important book that I recommend to any of you, which is called In Search of Memory. It's a very accessible text about what he has found out in all his years of research about memory. And finally, you have Oliver Sacks, a very important British neuroscientist with a couple of important books.
Tonight we continue our exploration of the wonders of the human brain. Our subject this evening, creativity. We have been fascinated by creativity for centuries.
Good. Let me.
And he particularly became interested in drawing and painting faces.
To be the shapes in the photograph. I'm plagued with indecision, and I paint it in, scrape it off. So I'm only going to work with.
That's become more and more true for you.
Yeah.
You've got no
squares and funny shapes.
Well, you know, not too.
In the way that this room is round, we know it in one particular way, and it's centered with this table. If it's rectilinear and this was a rectilinear table, we would know each other's response very, very differently. Those kinds of things have always interested me. Since I was a kid, walking one way on the beach and walking backward the other way completely confounded me. And those very simple things, being in a telephone booth as differentiating from being in a football stadium, I could never quite get back together in my head. Yeah, at one point I was doing a work for Jasper Johns in his studio, and I was splashing lead, and I'd splashed some lead against the wall, and Jasper asked me if I would build a piece for him in his studio, and I had a piece of lead with me, and I thought, why don't I just cast off this piece of lead, I'll shove it in the corner. And when I put it in the corner, I realized that, oh, the corner is holding the sheet of lead up. And I thought, I wonder. And so I went on and made the Jasper Johns piece, and immediately it got me out of the studio. I went and asked for a rigger, got a plate 10 by 20 feet long, put it in the corner. It bisected the room. It made the whole volume of the room an insulation. It made the space of the place as interesting as the steel plate itself. And the architecture just by bisecting the corner, was supporting the work. So there wasn't any welding, nothing, no support. The architecture itself was holding the work in place. But it's always in the process of working itself that ideas lead to other ideas for me, because the work isn't scripted or confined only to its notion of making, but in the process of it revealing itself to me is when I learn what is possible that I hadn't foreseen in what I projected. And one doesn't want to become a slave to one's own precedents, and the way to get around that is to constantly stay aware and ask questions about what it is I'm looking at and what it is I don't understand. And oftentimes when pieces are coming together, you see things that you could not have imagined, and they push you in a different direction.
The same for you, Joe.
This is very important. I've always said, for a long time, I've said inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. Because everything grows out of work. You do something, and that kicks open a door, and you look through that door, and you do I want to go there? Yes, so you move right through. Everything comes from that kind of approach to. You don't want to sit around and wait for the clouds to part and be struck in the head with a bolt of lightning, because it may never happen.
You don't get up in the morning and say, I have to be creative.
Right. No. It's not a word that we use.
You don't even use the word.
And we don't use inspiration, and we don't use terms like that.
So it only happens when you do what?
Sometimes it's because you put yourself in a position where you're more likely to bump into something.
Did you once tell me that the creative process that you engage in, whatever word we use instead of creative process, creating art, making art, you only take it halfway? Then the person who receives it takes it the rest of the way.
Yeah, well, actually, Duchamp said that. The artist had only 50% of the responsibility.
I never interviewed Duchamp.
and that was to put the work out. But the piece was completed when the viewer returned it to the artist. And we are in a business of visual communication.
I think this is a very important point, because it also points out that creativity, insight, is not just the artist's domain. The person who responds to the art also is undergoing a creative process. And part of the pleasure is the working through what the art means to them.
And the process for you becomes when the people are inside of the sculpture.
Yes. Our generation was very involved with the material aspects.
That's very important for the difference between his generation and yours. Okay?
Produce a certain effect through an activity with this physical aspects. I'm not sure that as mediatization comes in and virtual reality takes over and people are being immersed in the spectacular, whether those notions of materiality still hold. I think Anne may be able to speak to it because she's probably more abreast of what kids in their 20s or 30s are doing than I am. But it seems to me that the emphasis on understanding the logic of material and the manifestation of material in relation to form. And basically what I do is try to invent form that hasn't been predicated on past forms. I think that's what sculptors have always done. That seems to be almost the mandate. But I'm not sure if younger generations care about those criteria or those notions in the way that seem to be what my task had to be.
What do we know about the biology of creativity?
That's Oliver Sacks.
Well, in a word, not too much. But it certainly entails the lifting of various inhibitions and restraints, as well as stimuli. And you were speaking before about the two halves of the brain and how different they are, and certainly when the left half of the brain, which is more concerned with language and abstract thought, gets damaged, as it may in some diseases or with a stroke, you may have a release of perceptual powers and artistic powers from the other hemisphere. But
do you think the fact that we both have face blindness, is there an area of damage in both of our brains that can be pointed to?
Yes. Yes, I'd say that not so much damage as a failure of development. And yes, and a failure of development in areas which are similar to those in people who've had strokes or whatever and suddenly lose facial recognition.
There is an amazingly large representation in the brain of faces. There are 6 or 7 what are called face patches, in which you record from them. You see that 90% of the cells respond to faces. And there are, you know much better than I do, but there are different kinds of face blindness. There are blindnesses in which you don't recognize a face as a face at all, and the blindness in which I recognize a face, but I don't know its closest face. So you have no difficulty recognizing the object as a face, but you can't identify it as a specific person.
And we know it in one particular way, and it's centered with this table. If it's rectilinear.
Okay, we will keep working on this a little bit on Tuesday. I just wanted to insist in what he says. The artist several research about creating shapes, and the idea that when you are working on your projects, you have to draw, you have to do things with your hands, you have to write down, you have to do all those manual processes so that you give real shape to the materials you are working on. Okay, so keep that in mind.
In my project on paper, or
can you send me, because I'm gonna have to send it anyway to some of the TAs.